Who is against rooting out government corruption? Other than, of course, the corrupt. They are. But other than that, is the TDS in people so deeply ingrained that they can't even be grateful when Trump and Elon root out waste, fraud, and abuse? Apparently it is a TDS's. It's a dangerous disease. Welcome to our special on government corruption. At the end of the show today, we have our final guest is one of my favorite pastors. And we're going to speak about this from a theological perspective. And then my final segment are some biblical examples of government corruption, because there's nothing new under the sun. This is what we do on my podcast, Politics by Faith. We take a big thing that's happening in the news, and then we run it through a biblical worldview, a biblical lens. We go to the Bible, and if the easiest thing to do is to prove that whatever we're experiencing right now, there's nothing new. And the Bible is full of government corruption. The Pharisees, but go Old Testament. It's all about it. We'll dedicate our last segment to that. But these three words we hear over and over: waste, fraud, and abuse. What are these things? All right, it's hard to define. If I gave you an example of something, you're like, oh yeah, that's waste. Oh no, that's fraud. Oh, that's abuse. How do you know? They're hard to define. Right? Let me give you an example. Right? The National Democratic Institute. Okay, we got some pretty big wigs in this group. You got Tom Daschle, Stacey Abrams, Donna Brazile, Michael McFaul. He's the former ambassador to Russia. Randy Weingarten. She's the head of the teachers union. They're all on the board. Because this group raised a lot of money a couple years ago. They raised $887,000 in fundraisers. Wow, $887,000. Pretty good. They also received $167 million in government grants. $800,000 from donations. $167 million in government grants. Is that waste, fraud, or abuse? I think at least waste. Their mission. Here's their mission statement. We can throw up their mission statement. It's very important sounding. Here we go. Oh yes. To work in partnerships around the world to strengthen and safeguard democratic institutions, processes, norms, and values to secure a better quality of life for all. Oh, very good. I think if your mission statement has the word norms in it, you're probably not doing anything. So what do you call that? A group that raises no money on their own, but has major Democratic operatives on its board and has a mission statement that sounds like a money laundering operation. Is that waste, fraud, or abuse? Okay, you decide. How about this one? This one is from the DOGE guys. So you have an NGO, which is a government-funded, non-government organization. NGO, love that one. There's an NGO called Family Endeavors. They changed their name now just to Endeavors. So in 2021, there was a former ICE employee and Biden transition team member who joined this group, Family Endeavors. And after that, they got a Health and Human Services contract. So you can read here their also totally meaningless mission statement. Okay, well, we believe that everyone holds the capacity to grow, heal, change, succeed, and affect others positively, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so before this Biden-connected person joined this NGO, their cash and portfolio investments were $8 million. This is in 2020, $8 million. But then the Biden guy joined, and in 2023, their cash and investments went from $8 million to $520 million. Not bad, huh? Since March of last year, Health and Human Services has paid this group $18 million a month to keep open this Texas facility, and it's been empty the entire time. DOGE cut off the contract. That's $250 million a year saved. $250 million a year. Now, what is $250 million a year before we go back to our fun game we're playing? The way I like to calculate this is if you say that the average, don't say, it is true. Well, it's sort of true. Let's keep going. The average federal tax, I was gonna say the average person pays $14,000 in federal income taxes, but that's not true because most people don't pay any federal income taxes. But if you just take the amount of revenue that the government collects in federal income taxes divided by the number of people who file their income taxes, it ends up being $14,000 per tax return. Okay, so we'll just go with that number for the sake of our illustration here. 14,000 per. So if you file your taxes, federal income taxes, on average, you're paying $14,000. Some way more and some zero, but on average, $14,000, right? $250 million, that's 15 15,000 taxpayers, 15,000 whose entire federal income tax went to just that one program. And now it's not anymore. Awesome. So is that program, think about that, 15,000 people. They work all year long, and a good portion of their money, a good portion of their lives go to pay for just that one program. 15,000 taxpayers. So is that program waste, fraud, or abuse? Now, some people are saying that DOGE and Trump, they're just cutting things that aren't waste, fraud, or abuse. It's just things they don't like. Okay, maybe, yeah, sure. Like $59 million in FEMA money. So your money into FEMA that FEMA then spent on hotels in New York City to house illegal aliens. One of those hotels, the Roosevelt, owned by the government of Pakistan. Okay, do you call that waste, fraud, or abuse? Or do you call that just, we're not going to do that anymore? Now, the people who benefit from this, not the illegal aliens, the people at the top who benefit from this, are in an existential crisis. I get it. I mean, think about it. If you run an NGO that raises $0 from people, but you get $167 million from the government, and then that gets cut off, like you're going to be pretty upset about it. You're done for. Waste, fraud, or abuse. How about when Trump was just about when he was to take over, James O'Keefe did a little undercover honeypot operation, and they found someone at the EPA saying that they're throwing gold bars over the Titanic to spend as much as they can before Trump takes over. Okay, it was on video. Then Lee Zeldin comes in to run the EPA, and they found the gold bars. $20 billion they spent. The Biden administration rated on the way out the door, $20 billion going to a thing called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, just a slush fund for green energy programs with, of course, no accountability. Nothing has any accountability. None of these programs do. Elon was on Rogan the other day and talked about all the payments that go out of the Treasury Department. There's $7 trillion worth of payments go out of the Treasury Department. Here's how careful the government is with your tax money. By the way, your tax money that if you don't get precisely right how much you owe, they don't tell you how much you owe. You have to figure it out and guess how much you owe. And if you guess wrong, then you go to jail. So you better be right. But then they get your money, and this is what they do with it.
To give you an example of what's happening, say, Treasury, which is improving rapidly, the main payments computer is called PAM, payment accounts master database or something like that. But everyone calls it PAM. That's responsible for almost $5 trillion of payments a year, roughly $1 billion an hour, and when we came there, we're looking at the PAM, and it's like the payments have no. You could put a payment through with no payment categorization code, and no description on the payment, like basically untraceable blank checks. This is the kind of thing that if it was done as a public company, the company would be immediately delisted, and the executive team would be thrown in prison. But this is just normal at the government.
So now, heaven forbid, you have to fill out the little box that says, what is this money for? We're not asking a lot here. It's a pretty low bar. Here's one more clip of Elon.
I mean, there's a lot of payments where someone just approved the payment, but then that payment officer changed jobs or retired or died, and the payments just keep going. It's like if you forget to pay your gym membership or something like that.
Right.
Now imagine it's not the gym membership. You said your gym membership's $20 billion a year or something, but they forgot to turn it off. That's happening at scale in the government.
Amazing. Not anymore. I actually want to stop here. I've kind of covered some of the easy things. We have some wonderful guests coming up who are going to go a little bit deeper coming up next. I also want to ask our next guest about these Congress people and their net worth shooting through the roof. Everyone knows Nancy Pelosi, but the top 20 Congress people who have gained the most net worth in the last, or since they took office, on average, if you put those top 20 together, their net worths have increased 422%. 422% since they've taken office. They get paid like $100K a year. And that doesn't include the representative from Maine, Shali Pingree. I've never heard of her. Her net worth since 2008, Shali Pingree, her net worth since 2008, when she first became a congresswoman, has gone up 73,000%. You heard that right, 73,000%. What? Her ex-husband owns a hedge fund, so who knows what is going on there. We all know Nancy Pelosi, but who's Shali Pingree? I will say, the Clinton Foundation, their donations have decreased 75% since their peak in 2016. We'll see how well her ex-husband's hedge fund does if she ever leaves office. The point is, this corruption is going to end. Trump's going to root it all out. I'm hopeful. They're not going to stop until it's gone. And we're going to make this government so small that there's no power left in it. There's no reason to bribe anyone for anything because they have no power to do anything. That needs to be our goal. Government corruption, two men who have dedicated their lives to exposing this and then connecting the dots and telling the stories. Peter Schweizer, he's the president of the Government Accountability Institute, and Seamus Bruner is the director of research at that Government Accountability Institute. Seamus, Peter, good to see you, gentlemen. Thanks for taking time.
Thanks for having us.
Peter, I'll start with you. DOGE and Elon exposing a lot of what you guys have been doing for many years. What is Elon doing? How is he helping the cause? And where are you guys going to pick it up from here?
Well, I think he's doing enormously important work. Number one, he has the capacity and the ability to get access to information that, of course, we cannot, being a nonprofit organization. And there's also the speed with which they're proceeding. So I think it's enormously helpful, enormously important. There's plenty to go around. This is corruption in D.C. is a target-rich environment. I think part of our job is to follow behind. All this information, all this data comes in. You need to make sense of it. You need to explain what the relationships are. You know, there may be a $100 million contract that was given that's now been canceled. That's not just a question of inefficiency, but it's actually graft or corruption, meaning that $100 million contract maybe went to a senator's brother or sister. So there's plenty to digest, and that's what we're going to spend our time doing.
Seamus, we asked the question in the first segment here, waste, fraud, and abuse. That's what we always hear all the time. How do you categorize those? Do you add a different category? What is waste? Like, we have an example of something you're like, oh, is that waste, fraud, or abuse, or graft, or what? What are these things?
Yeah, well, typically it's one of the three. The federal government, according to the Constitution, shouldn't be doing most of the things that it's currently doing. So waste is probably the largest bucket. Abuse, maybe the second largest. That would be sort of the cronyism, not necessarily illegal activity. But I wouldn't discount fraud. Fraud is obviously the worst category, and all of the above are happening.
Peter, connect some dots for us. So we talked about this one group, the National Democratic Institute. They raised $900,000 a year for fundraising, but they got a $167 million grant, and there's all these Democratic operatives. So I don't know if you've looked at that group in particular, but like Stacey Abrams is on this board. How does she benefit being on this phony baloney board? Like, how does that work? How does the money get moved?
Well, I'll give you an example. There's another organization we've already looked at called Power Forward, which was a sort of a green a bank, as it were. Stacey Abrams is also on the board with Democratic operatives, and they were slated for a $2 billion grant from the EPA. That organization had only been set up like 2 months before they suddenly got $2 billion. If you get a pot of money, there's all kinds of ways you can move this money around. So it's a little bit obvious and on the nose. If, the leaders that get this grant cut themselves $1 million checks, that's a little obvious. That's going to lead to speculation and investigation. So what you do is maybe you set up LLCs. So you have a nonprofit that hires subcontractors to do your marketing, to do your publicity, to do your fundraising, and you own that LLC, or you hire your brother or your sister to run that LLC. So there's all kinds of ways to shift money around. It's fungible. And let's remember, this is what political operatives do. So whether it's in the government or whether it's running a nonprofit, they are used to shifting money around to achieve their personal and political objectives. And I have no doubt that's what they're doing when they get this government grant money. One of the things we need to do, in addition to exposing this stuff, is have greater transparency with these so-called nonprofit organizations. Who are their subcontractors? Who actually owns the subcontractors? That would be very enlightening. And right now, they're not really required to disclose that much information about them.
Okay, go half a step deeper. So not that I'm looking to launder money through an NGO anytime soon, but and they know, like, all these people know how to do this, right? This is like a whole system. It's like an unspoken system. They know how it all works. What do you need to announce now? Like, what needs to be public and what doesn't need to be public that they take advantage of, Peter?
Well, I think you need to look at the LLCs that are subcontractors for a lot of these nonprofits, any nonprofit. Let's say you get a $10 million grant from the federal government. You can, as a nonprofit, literally take $9 million of that and send $1 million to 9 LLCs. One of them can be doing publicity. One can be doing travel and logistics. Another one can, be handling another aspect of the business. Who owns those LLCs? Well, you don't have to disclose. It could just be a publicity company. But you, as a nonprofit executive, can actually own that LLC. You're required to disclose it on your 990 tax filing with the IRS, but a lot of them don't do it. That's the kind of basic information. Also, who owns those LLCs? If it's not necessarily the politician themselves, are they related? Is it the husband or wife, for example, of the person running the LLC? So all that kind of information should be disclosed, and it's not required to be disclosed at this point.
Crazy. Seamus, what's one of the most egregious things you've learned in these last couple of weeks?
Yeah, well, Peter's absolutely right. And not just the husband or wife or brother, but the adult son. How about Hunter Biden in Ukraine? You see all these memes going around about the Ukrainian laundromat and how Hunter was getting kickback money and all of that. Well, if you look at it, it was actually shocking. USAID was sending money to that oil and gas company in Ukraine. And so around and around the money goes. You can't really say that it's per se money laundering, but it's exactly like Peter described. I mean, that's one of the more egregious examples. Other USAID examples is how about they're funding media companies? I mean, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there if a media company is getting money from the Biden administration or other administrations and then putting out favorable coverage on Biden initiatives. So I don't think the U.S. government should be funding any media things that are not in the national interest that could be easily described as in the national interest. And so, I mean, that's pretty bad stuff. And then, yeah, the $2 billion to the Stacey Abrams connected nonprofit, that's bad. And then I know, Mike, you'll want a Control Oligarchs update. George Soros is funding, his dark money machine is funding the resistance to DOGE. They're funding a governing for transparency initiative, some left-wing nonprofit that just popped up out of nowhere that will be waging lawfare against DOGE. So we're going to keep an eye on that.
Very good. Seamus, you're the Soros expert. Elon was saying the other day on Rogan that Soros will just spend a little bit of money to set up an NGO and then use that to leverage, or not use it, I guess, use it to just not leverage, just get a bunch of grant money from the taxpayer, 10, 100x. Is that how he would operate?
Yeah, totally. I mean, he partnered with a lot of the USAID initiatives in foreign countries, and because it's so far out of sight from the American taxpayers, it's kind of out of mind. And so he would partner, the Clinton Foundation did the same thing, where you partner with, you set up these NGOs that partner with USAID, and then they get a ton of grant money. And whether actually the work was done or if some nefarious purpose was going on, it's very hard to figure out what was going on in a country where you don't speak the language. Most Americans don't speak the language. Like Ukraine is a prime example. There were all of these NGOs over there operating, getting grant money, and nobody really knows what they were up to.
Yeah, clearly the best place to launder money would be a war-torn country. Peter, to all the fraudsters, well, even like the people just wasting, like we played a clip earlier of Elon talking about someone will approve a $10 million a year contract, and then that government person dies or moves on or whatever, and that person just keeps getting this contract money, just keeps coming in his bank account every year, and he's not doing anything, but keeps coming in. So this has got to be existentially crushing for the people who either like purposefully have tried to game the system, or the people who have just benefited almost by accident, right? Like they must be freaking out.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is an earthquake, and I think actually a good earthquake because it's really shaking things up. If you have a nonprofit organization and it's doing worthwhile work, you should be able to raise money in the private sector. And if there is some, legitimate function with the government, let's say you're using nonprofits maybe to feed homeless vets, for example, you should be able to compete for those contracts One of the reasons you see a lot of contracts, Seamus mentioned USAID repeatedly, a lot of times these contracts are no bid contracts because it's a quote unquote crisis situation. So they don't have time to do bid contracts. Those are the best federal contracts you want because the government bureaucrats will approve them, essentially whatever is in it. So this is, I think, vitally important. It's showing the huge amounts of money that are being spent by government bureaucrats with no accountability, and I hope that we continue to hear more and more of this going forward.
Seamus, is it possible, Elon the other day was talking about I forget the number, like 14 million people who are over the age of 150 or whatever. So that, or these contracts, people that are getting money and for doing nothing, and that's like in the waste category, I guess. Are these people just getting money? Like, I don't get, like I said, I'm so far away from just money coming in my mailbox every month for doing nothing. I can't even fathom that. Like, is that happening? People just getting money for literally doing nothing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's in the waste. It's also in the fraud category. You see it especially with Medicare and Medicaid. That is the largest chunk of the pie, by the way. The HHS budget, when you put all of the programs that HHS sends our taxpayer money to, that's almost $2 trillion per year. A lot of these so-called entitlement programs, you're not going to be able to cut them very easily without people getting upset. But what you can do is look at where the money flows to through those programs. And I saw an example just recently of a couple in New Jersey who had scammed $1.2 billion. Just two people were able to pull off a $1 billion heist of the Medicaid program. And you do that through all kinds of fraudulent billing tactics. And it happens all the time. Medicare and Medicaid fraud, it happens all the time. It's happening every day. And so cutting down on that fraud is a way that you can bring these so-called entitlement programs down a little bit. It still is going to be a lot, over $1 trillion, but there's hundreds of billions of dollars in these programs that can be cut. And the last thing I'll say is on the HHS money, they're actually funding all kinds of DEI programs. Yes, that's what DOGE is looking for, is this DEI stuff. But we just put out a report in The Spectator, one of our researchers, Priscilla, who found that they are hiding DEI grants under weird terms like social emotional learning, and resiliency is a new term that they're going to be putting sort of this woke stuff under. And so DOGE has got to be on the lookout for some of these cryptically worded woke programs that are still getting funds today.
Yeah, belonging is another one. Peter, last question for you. Are there crimes here? And do you recommend this administration eventually get around to charging people for all this fraud?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, Seamus is right. The amount of money we're talking about is enormous, but I happen to believe that it's not just about saving money. It's what you said as well. Do we really want to have a culture in Washington, D.C., or a part of our national fabric that it's essentially okay to rip off the government? If you get caught, you're going to lose your grant, but oh well, you just go on and try to find somebody else to rip off. I think it's essential that people that are committing crimes, that are committing fraud, that are engaged in criminal activity, be charged. That's what we have laws for. And if you don't do that, you just encourage more of this behavior, or you have a future administration that's not pursuing these things as aggressively. These people are all in business again. I don't think anybody really wants that. So absolutely, we need to have prosecutions taking place when laws have been violated.
Peter Schweizer, Seamus Bruner, the wonderful Government Accountability Institute. Everyone go to the website. Gentlemen, thank you for helping us connect the dots. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
This is so essential. It's one thing for DOGE, and it's wonderful for DOGE to say, hey, here's a $10 billion contract that's going out. We're like, oh, it's crazy. But then what? Like, wait a second. To where, and who's getting it, and what are they doing with it, and who's on the take? That's where the Government Accountability Institute jumps in from there.